welcome to the next session. So we're going to have now the second keynote, or today's keynote speech by Natalia Ramondo. We have some small tradition of having Argentinian keynote speakers here. It's the second time, knowing the Argentinians know a lot of macroeconomics, understand macroeconomics, but we have a hard time in managing our macroeconomics, right? One of the paradoxes. And actually, when I was studying in the monetary macro course, Natalia was also my TA. She never shied against me, so that's good again. And I think they're also, you know each other from a long time also, like both of you. But then, back then already, Natalia was projecting to be a very important economist, and she went to Chicago to do a PhD. Now she's an assistant professor at Boston University, also associate editor in many of the important journals in the field, and also associated with NBR and CPR. And she's been having this agenda of multinational firms, both in empirics and theory. And also parallelly, he introduced to more like for the trade literature, these very complex and quantitative models, including multinational firms. So that was one of the most important agendas in the past, and now they are using this machinery to understand climate change in this presentation. So I just give.
Thank you so much for the invitation, the presentation. I have to say, I'm a full professor now. I wish I were, because that means that I was like 15 years ago. So that would be great. No, it's as associate. But yes, keeping the tradition. So she was your TA. I was like one TA many years ago. Thanks for remember that. So this chat talk yesterday about AI, and I'm going to talk about maybe the other existential threat about climate change. I will narrow a bit the focus. It's going to be about multinational firms. So the effect that the activities of these big companies have on climate change. So let me start with something that we all know. Average temperature has been growing in the last 40 years, and this is a manifestation of climate change. There are some projections that says that there is a huge role for policy, and you can see different projections of path from no climate policy. We want to achieve the 1.5 Celsius decrease to a lot of policy, the green line, where we may achieve that. But these are policies that require a lot of resources from governments, transfers maybe to foreign countries, and also a political economy process. So our environmental envoy, John Kerry, said, if we want to do this transition, we need to engage the private sector. So multinational corporations are a prime candidate because they are the biggest players in the private sector. They are the ones that lead globalization. They carry most of the international trade in the world, most of the innovation, and most of the missions. Okay? But it's not obvious what is the effect on carbon emissions. That's what going to be my focus today. So let me give you an example. So basically the question is like, I'm going to show you some facts and then the theory, and are they part of can be the solution as part of the private sector, or are also part of the problem? So basically their activity increases emissions or decreases. So let me show you a very simple example. This is a case study, and I'm going to lead through the theory also with this example. So MNEs is short for multinational enterprise, and this is the example of the steel industry in Vietnam. So the steel industry, it's a nice case because it has two technologies to produce almost the same type of steel. So one is very clean. Those are the mini mills that work with electricity. And the dirty technology are these blast furnaces that use a lot of coal. So one, like the clean, is twice as clean, twice less emissions than the dirty one.
When you say it's clean,
I'll be very precise later.
electricity is produced by coal.
Yeah. So that's going to be here. So but let me give you this case. So Italy is the leading country on mini mills. They have the biggest market share. China is the leading country on these blast furnaces. These countries overall, I don't know Tenova's energy use, but we know that Italy is the one that has the least energy use in the steel industry. So it's the cleanest steel industry in the world. Now what happened is that both of them, the Chinese company and the Italian company, opened affiliates to produce in Vietnam. And if you read their statements, in the one they opened in Vietnam, Tenova opened in Vietnam, was with this green technology. The one that China opened was with these blast furnaces. So the Italian firm also was devoted to the Vietnamese market, but also to exports. So they were using Vietnam to export to other places in Asia, also potentially to Italy. China was mostly devoted to the Vietnamese market. There was also a Vietnamese steel corporation that is in Vietnam that has a level of cleanliness that I'm going to be very specific about, that is in between the Italian and the Vietnamese and the Chinese company. So the question is, this example, we can really don't know if this activity increased or decreased emissions, because it will depend how they use their fuels, say energy, where energy comes from. If this production is replacing Italian cleaner production of steel, or if it's replacing some Chinese farm that was previously there, or Vietnamese farms, or they are replacing with their exports other activities in third countries. So that's what we're going to bring to the table, data and more theory to try to answer and kind of put numbers to these trade-offs. So let me show you this, start with this picture, just to give you an idea that maybe there is something going on like the Tenova case. We don't know yet. So this picture shows you energy emissions intensity. So emissions, CO2 emissions per dollar of output. And you can see there is a huge heterogeneity in the world. This plots these country fixed effects controlling by sector. So we are looking at the steel industry, China versus Italy. Okay, so you can see that some countries, the countries at the top, and India and China being in our data the most, the ones with most emissions intensity, it's like sevenfold almost. So it's huge. So of course, these are very different countries in very different dimensions. They can have different fuel prices, fuel choices because of that. Environmental regulations are going to be very different here. They have different intensity in the use of energy and different productivity. So what is that we see here? I mean, we need more data, maybe more structure to say if the companies that we are producing in dirtier countries are contributing to that or they are deterring that. But just this is to give you an idea that there is a lot of heterogeneity in energy intensity. So this speaks that maybe technologies are very different across countries too. So what do we know about M&Es and emissions? Okay, so here I'm going to use some of our evidence and then going deeper into that and some of other papers. So what we know first in relation with multinationals is that the same picture as I showed you before, but now I overlap that yellow bar that shows net multinational activity. So the ones that are positive, that flip to the right, are countries that have more activity outside of multinationals than in their country. And you can see that, on average, those are the cleaner countries. Those are the sources of multinationals. Of course, there is somebody there that is called US that is not that clean and has a lot of activity, too. And then on the bottom, you have more the countries that are net receivers of multinationals. So maybe there is some hope that we are transferring some greener technologies to host countries that are not as clean. But again, this is not definitive. There is also, and this is from another paper, evidence what we call pollution heavens, right? Affiliates of multinationals have clean homes, are dirtier abroad. And this is has too many things, but so on the x-axis you have environmental regulation. So the higher the better, okay? The clean countries are those on the top, on the right on top, and you see small dots because they are clean at home. So the size of the bubble tells you how clean they are at home. But the y-axis tells you how much are their foreign emissions relative to home. So you can see that countries up there, the green ones, that are very clean, emit a lot abroad, the most. Okay, so where they go? Well, not surprisingly, they go to countries with laxer regulations. So that's the pollution heaven or pollution halo hypothesis. So here you can see the blue lines are again emissions per dollar, and you go from lower emissions per emissions intensity in countries that are similar or stronger on the regulations to more where they are weaker. These kind of points that maybe multinationals is a bad idea. But I'll show you two other pieces of evidence. That
this just says that the dots are below the 45-degree line on the previous.
Yeah. So here, I'll show you the positive, right? I show you kind of the Tenova stuff. On the left, we have that, and this is, I'll show you the data in a second, and this shows that the affiliates of multinationals all around the world are cleaner than domestic firms. And this happens, and there is a lot of evidence by country that shows the same thing. So at least, as we know it for TFP, they're more productive, we also know that in general, they're cleaner on average. And on the right side, this is our new fact that we'll document in the paper, is that if you have affiliates that come from clean countries, clean homes, they're also cleaner in their host country, the Tenova example. Okay, so there is this pecking order of clean to dirty in terms of homes, and is kept, that pecking order is kept for the affiliates. Okay, so that's the right part. So in a couple of slides, I go deeper on the origins of the data. I think that's a contribution of what we do. So what is it? So that's what we are going to ask in this research project we have with Eki Garcia-Lerman, Rodriguez Clare, and Joe Shapiro. Andres has been my co-author on this agenda for multinationals for many years now. and we team with Joe and Eki that know the environmental part very well. So we are going to put together our quantitative models of multinationals and trade with machinery related to emissions and energy. Yeah.
So is that a causal relationship for like the digitalization, or are they
No.
like confounding factors? Either they go there for other reasons?
No, I'm just showing you correlations. Yeah, the papers then go on to make more causal statements, but even our fact is going to be just like a correlation. Okay.
Compose what comes from the lower energy intensity of that production?
Lower. Say it again.
So could we decompose what comes from the fact that they may be more effective in using energy?
Yeah.
Or what's coming from their different energy mix?
Yeah. In theory, we could. I'll show you how much data we have. Okay. So I'll be very specific because it's an important part. So that's the first thing, how we are going to answer this question. We're going to put in place a machinery that has a lot of data. So we are going to put together a data set on M&Es and the environment, and that fact that I'll show you on the right side, that affiliates from cleaner homes have lower emissions per dollar everywhere. That's the new fact we bring into the table. And I'll tell you in a bit how we want you to interpret it, or how we interpret it through the lenses of the model. Then we're going to put together this quantitative model that's going to allow farms to trade, to have international trade, to do what we call multinational production, that is setting production abroad. We call it MP, and energy. Okay, so there's going to be this layer of energy. So we're going to leverage tools that we use in our previous research of all the international part of the model. I'm going to be using tools that follow the seminal work by Eaton and Kortum. And what that will give us is closed forms and aggregation properties. So equilibrium is going to be very smooth, and it's going to be easy to do contrafactuals. Okay. So we're going to put a layer of multiple sectors and input-output relations, what we call the input-output loops, as in the paper 10 years ago by Lorenzo Caliendo and Fernando Parro. And here it's going to be important to have energy and mining sectors that produce the fossil fuels, and as well as other inputs. One thing that we are going to do different with respect to the environmental literature that has been focused on trade is that instead of having pollution as an input, we are going to have energy as an input. And that's going to be the difference. So we'll be going to be able to speak directly to the question where, like, electricity is produced how? Well, we're going to look at input-output tables, and we're going to know that. But here is a key difference. So pollution, if you know the work by Copeland and Taylor, those models have pollution is an input. There is a dirty input. Here is just directly the energy, whatever energy countries or sectors or country sectors use, or firms. And we are going to say that this energy intensity is the thing that firms can transfer across countries. So if you use less fuels at home, your technology is like that, you're going to transfer that technology everywhere through your affiliates, and that will affect emissions worldwide. Of course, affiliates will make decisions based on local prices of coal. If coal is cheap, they're going to substitute toward more coal. But the technologies might be cleaner, the blueprint. So we are going to estimate key elasticities of the model, and surprisingly, there is very little estimates on energy demand and supply elasticities for energy, including fossil fuels. So we are going to provide those that maybe are of independent interest for people doing environment. And then we are going to have these technology choice elasticities. I'll show you in a second how they look like. And finally, we're going to use the machinery for carbon accounting, meaning who is responsible for emissions, for carbon emissions. The common ones are production, that's the smokestack you see in the factories. Consumption is the one that considers trade, how many emissions you have embedded on imports, and we're going to add ownership. So what is responsibility for the farms you have around the world? And then we're going to ask, and this is very preliminary, if a world without MP is cleaner or dirtier. So that's the plan.
Is substitute for export always here?
It's going to substitute for export. That's at the heart of all these models, basically, that you make this choice between serving a market with an affiliate or export. So it's going to be there. So what's new? And in this research agenda, well, there is a huge emphasis on trade and environment, but there is very little done on the activity of multinationals. The latest flagship publication of the World Bank was called The Effect of Multinationals on Climate Change. So we can see that there is a big interest on that. And on the other hand, the literature that I belong to on multinationals, well, they don't have the environmental layer. So we allow for this. We bring to the table these layers, basically. And then you can think that when the machinery is in place, you can do all sorts of exercise about policy and other type of counterfactors. So this is I'll show you some of the data and the new facts. Again, model, some estimates, and then I'll conclude with some model-based results. So let me tell you about the data and what are the limitations. So we have aggregate data, and one comes from a very common source used by trade people. That is the World Input-Output dataset. This data has like a supplement for the environmental variables, and it's called XEO-based or EORA. There is all sort of concordance you have to make, but we did it, and we're going to provide that as a public good. And what this data tells you are emissions and energy consumption by industry, country, and energy type. So it tells you Italy in the steel industry, in coal. That's kind of the level of variation. And for the activity of multinationals, we have very good aggregate data sets. Here we use the one of the OECD, and here we can have industry, origin, and host country. So the activity of Italian affiliates in Vietnam in the steel industry. So we are going to use these two data together for some things. And then we're going to have farm and affiliate level data. So the major source for this, for farm level data on the environment is this Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP. So if you look at the World Bank publication, they use the same data. So it's a self-reported. Farms have to self-report. For Europe, because they have the CAP system, is very accurate. And researchers have been checking the quality for other countries, and it seems that it's very high quality. That said, it's also, even if it targets large farms, right, it covers a lot of emissions. So these are like in this World Bank report, for instance, they document that 157 farms have 10% of direct emissions in the world, and if you consider all their global value chain, it goes up to 2/3. So we're looking at very many, perhaps few farms, but big players. But what is interesting to us for this data is that if you have this Tenova, say, in Italy, they report the emissions in Italy, but also in each of their locations abroad, in Vietnam and all the other places they have it. So we can link that with Orbis, that is the data set for corporations, for siblings too in the world, and have some measure of emissions at the farm level. And we can have that for the parent, that we identify who's the parent of which affiliate in the world. That's why we can do this link and document some of the facts that I'll show you next. For some estimates, and I can talk more if you're interested later, we will use the census of manufacturers for some estimates of some of the elasticities. Okay? So this is the fact that I show you in that picture. And so let me say one thing So we have the problem here is that the farm level you have emissions, but you don't know how much they consume of energy. Okay, so we're going to infer that. We know how much the industry and the country consumes of each type of energy, but we don't know that at the farm level. So there is this kind of two measures that ideally you will want to have both for all farms, but we have it for one or the other. That said, there's got been by engineers calculate how much you produce. You can transform that on emissions, on CO2 emissions. So we're going to also use those technical relationships to infer some of the emissions. Okay, so this is the fact that I show you in that picture, in that density picture. Again, so to give you a number, this is going to be a target in our estimation of the model. So what this shows is that the affiliates with cleaner homes are cleaner everywhere. So here we compare in the steel industry in Vietnam, the Chinese and the Italians affiliates. And how much are they related to the emissions from China and Italy? Well, 0.6. That 0.6 is our favorite estimate. Okay, so home matters. It seems that home matters for where you come from, matters for your emissions, where you go to. What we're going to do, again, this is not causal, this is a correlation. We're going to interpret this fact through the lenses of our models on having some technology that you bring with you to the host country. Okay? So basically it tells us that the model needs a home fixed effect somewhere. Of course, it needs also host fixed effects, but those are obvious. Those are maybe local prices of energy, for instance. So, and again, this fact is we can document this fact thanks to this link we did with the CDP data and the Orbis data that tells us who belongs to who in the environmental data set.
Sorry, Natalia, I missed it, but these are cross-sectional reductions over the time period?
This is 2014. Yeah, so again, that can be challenging, and we are a bit restricted by what the input-output, war input-output can tell us, and this one. So we have more years. We have 2019 too. But I think this one is 2014. Yeah, and we cannot use so far the timeline mentioned. So the model will have, I know mine is almost the only trade paper. Trade as a field has a lot of subscripts. So the variables can become like very quickly like animals that go out of control. So let me give you in a nutshell how the model will work, more or less. So so imagine we have a mine, right, of coal in Australia, and is owned by Glencore, a Swiss company, right? So coal, the fossil fuels will produce emissions, are the only ones producing emissions when they are used, when they are burned by companies and by activities around the world. So that's what we're going to assume. In reality, there is some emissions that don't come from the burning fossil fuels, but those are very small in comparison. Okay? For instance, the chemical industry, when they produce plastic, in the process of producing plastic, they produce some emissions. But the ones that come from burning these fossil fuels are the overwhelming ones for the CO2. So we have that mine, and this coal is tradable, so you can trade it, you can send it to other countries from Australia to produce steel, rubber, glass, other intermediates, right? And these intermediates go into the production of a car, say in Korea, by General Motors, right? So here I'm kind of building how emissions are going to go. You need to follow them through the global value chain. So of course, some of the steel can go back to produce coal. That's our input-output links in the model. And then you can sell to final consumers the GM car. In this ideal world, you send it to France. That's not true in reality. Nobody, no French person will buy a GM. They will buy a Tesla, though, I know, because I saw them, but not a GM. But, well, give me that. So we need to say, well, what are the emissions embedded in the purchase of that final consumer, right? And in general, the literature has followed these emissions by saying, oh, they come from Korea, and Korea is this clean or this dirty, how much this good, how many emissions are embedded on those imports. We want to know also that they're produced by a U.S. farm in this case. So that's what the model will allow us. But basically, now I'm going to put equations to this value chain, this global value chain, that not only I need to follow locations of productions, of inputs and outputs, but also the ownership of all that. So that's going to be the layer, the new layer. So, yeah.
Since you're using the table, basically you are assuming the average energy mix for the energy qui est productive dans le secteur. Tu attribues l'énergie. Si you put out the table, par exemple, if you look at it, that this multinational firm or particular firm is a particular energy mix.
Yeah. Yeah, so we need to I'll show you how we make some abstractions of that. So that said, and the fact that I show you is at the firm level, the model is going to be aggregate. There is not going to be farms. You will see in a model. There's going to be farms, but yeah, at the end, the machinery is aggregate. Okay, so we are going to rely on more this industry country data. But the fact, so so we want to answer the question, what's the effects of multinationals on CO2 emissions, right? And when you ask yourself your question, you need to make some assumptions on how firms transfer their technology, okay? So we could have assumed, and I'll show you that case in a second, that they don't transfer anything. It's an assumption. The fact that we document tells us that maybe that's not the right assumption. So in that sense, will help us on modeling choices, okay? And maybe it's targets of some calibration, but yeah, that's the only way we use farms in this setup, okay? So again, as I said, this is heavy in notation, but hopefully you got the structure with the pictures. So there are many countries, and countries can be home of multinationals, those are the I's. They can be the location of production of multinationals, those are the L's, and could be the destination of sales, the N's, right? And there are many sectors and what is called input-output loops. So what is an input-output loop? For if you are not familiar with the trade literature, is that you put an input, you get an output, and you do an aggregation, and you put that input again into the production. Okay, so that's an easy way of modeling a value chain. Okay, so what are the sectors here? Here we have to also make some decisions. We have 6 energy sectors. 3 are the fossil fuels, the mining sector, we are going to call them, and those are coal, natural gas, and crude oil. And we decided to distinguish between these, among these 3, because they have very different emissions. Coal is the dirtiest, natural gas is the cleanest. And then there are 3 more energy sources that are non-mining sectors. That one is electricity, a big one. Refined oil, that use basically all the crude oil is used for refine and gas distribution. Now, electricity is going to be a sector. So however electricity is produced in a country, it will show up there. Non-energy sectors is everything else. Steel is there, chemicals, etc. Preferences are very standard, Cobb-Douglas across sectors and CS within each sector. So what are these mining sectors? Well, these mining sectors are produced with 6 factors that are the mines. And these mines will create like decreasing returns. And the degree of decreasing return is this new S there. And mines are going to, a mining good, like say coal, is going to produce with labor and a bundle of intermediates. And these news here, they have the whole input-output table for mining sectors. So those, you can take them from the data directly. Now, trade is Armington here, and multinational is boring. It doesn't do much. It's just exogenous. So that Glencore that I showed you before, we just take it from the data and say, oh, those are the multinationals in coal in Australia. And there is perfect competition here. As I said, emissions are only generated by using fossil fuels. So if you want to compute emissions, well, you have the quantity here. The Q will be the quantity produced from a mine, right, in country L, sector S, and maybe it belongs to a multinational. And then you have that E, that is the technical factor that converts quantities in emissions. And emissions is script E. And this happen again, the summation over sectors is the mining sector, the fossil fuels. Of course, the Q depends on who demands. So we are going to keep track. That's why you need prices and all the economic variables, because they affect demand of fossil fuels. Of course, this is the supply curve. And one thing that we allow with these decreasing returns is for increasing upward sloping supply curves for mining. Now, the non-mining sectors are the ones that are going to be where multinationals are going to be interesting. Okay, so production, I'm just highlighting the relevant elasticities of each layer of the model, but production is going to be carried with labor, energy, and non-energy inputs. And here, on the trade and multinational production structure of the model is here where we leverage our previous research. And imagine, just for a second, that I don't have multinationals. And what we are using basically in this layer is the Mellitz model. Okay, so Mellitz with Pareto. So Mellitz says there is, I have still half an hour. Yeah. So Mellitz will say firms are heterogeneous in productivity, and productivity is a random draw from a Pareto. When we add more multinationals, think about that trick, the same thing, but instead of being Pareto, it's going to be multivariate Pareto, because the multinational will have draws in all the countries in the world. Maybe they use them. Okay, but we use this structure because that is going to have aggregation properties and closed-form solutions that are very easy to work with equilibrium conditions. In that sector, again, think Mellitz model. If it were only a trade model, we'll have monopolistic competition. And then firms are going to make this energy intensity technology choice with some elasticities. And that technology choice, that blueprint that they choose, they're going to replicate it everywhere they go. So here is the production function. And this is independent of if you put multinationals or not. You can have a closed economy and work with the production function that is like this, and the estimates of our elasticities can be useful also for those environments, or an environment with only trade. So these production functions will have two layers. So one is that you have the energy input and the non-energy input, and that combines CS with elasticity epsilon. And again, this one, we are more general. The macro literature environment here imposes Cobb-Douglas. We're going to find a very low epsilon. So it's far away from Cobb-Douglas. And then the energy input will have, you can use many, 6 energy inputs, and those are the Ks, right? And you can combine them with elasticity gamma. That again, it's a layer that sometimes in the macro literature is close in the environment literature. And again, we allow it for more flexibility, and we are going to find that it's low, actually, 0.45. It's on the complementarity side. So here, what we have there, these deltas are, if you look at them, they are at the location level. They are sector specific. So this is steel in Vietnam for coal. So this is something that will capture things from the environment, maybe regulations that are specific to a location, a sector, and a fuel type or an energy type. So basically anything that is not in prices, this is going to be here. We could put it in another part of the model. We'll decide to put it here. It's a shifter.
Data over time, to identify these things, perhaps?
No, you'll see. This one I'm going to confound it with prices.
I was going to say, because if you think about prices as changing these quantities and
Yeah.
fixed effects.
Yeah, so we are going to have an object called shadow price. And I'll show you how with some more structure in the model, we can uncover those. So
It's potentially important if you think about
very.
If you think about policies or changes in prices.
So we're working now in cleaning prices, so we can disentangle better like the observed price from this one that is everything else. So that's kind of the idea. That is the regulation. I mean, the big regulation is observable, but there might be things that firms do that at that level, location, fuel type, energy type, and sector that you don't observe. Some constraints. So yeah. So yes, this is very important, and it will play a role in the decision of which blueprint to use.
And the shocks, they are independent of products, so the multinational affiliate level shocks, they're independent.
A second, no.
Okay.
You will see in a second. There is something that is good and something that is not as good. It's for aggregation too. So the non, let me just finish here. And the non-energy part, right? The non-energy inputs follows a very standard functional form, and the Cobb-Douglas in this multi-sector trade model. So they have labor, and they have these aggregate inputs back to for production. So the betas again vary the whole input-output matrix. You take them from the data, and tells you those input-output links. So yes, this is going to be very important. So again, so we have, say, a firm with productivity C. Forget about the vector for a second. If this were like a Melitz model, that's the Melitz productivity, the C, you produce in country L, that's your productivity shifter. And then we're going to add these A's that will tell us, these weights of the CS functions, that will tell us the energy intensity versus the other inputs, right? So you're going to choose the intensity of electricity, of coal, etc. And then you're going to choose the intensity of your combo of labor or other inputs. So that's going to be not a parameter, but a choice. It's going to be an endogenous variable. That's going to be the twist. Again, so far I can I can kind of not talk about multinationals. You can be in a closed economy model where firms choose according to their local environment, their A's, they have some productivity, or you can think about a model with only trade and do the same exercise. Okay, you choose your blueprints and you have some productivity draw. Everything will go through. So the twist with multinationals is that instead of having one draw, because you produce in only one place, you can have many draws because you can produce in many places, potentially. So the CL is the productivity in production location L. The thing is, what is the distribution that we choose for that vector? And there is where we are going to assume some correlation. So that's what this multivariate Pareto that we introduced in a previous paper gives you. So basically, this multivariate Pareto has this form. It's very similar. It looks like almost like a Frechet, but the marginals are Pareto. Has this shape parameter that is theta, has a scale parameter that are the t's, and then it has a correlation parameter that are the rho's. So if draws are independent across production locations, the rho is 0. And you go back to your to the Pareto. But rho can be anything between 0 and 1. And if it goes to 1, it means that the parent and all the affiliates have the same draws. That has been the canonical model of multinationals, Hellman-Melitz-Zippel, for instance. So we allow for this smoothness on these draws. So what does it bias, and why we chose in previous research this multivariate Pareto? It biases that you can solve everything on closed forms with these functional forms. Aggregate expenditure, prices, profits. So equilibrium conditions are easy to write. So what is the key here? And so here the key is that these distributions are good for head-to-head comparisons. So here, what is the firm doing? Well, the firm is choosing how to serve France, say, and they're choosing of serving France from Korea or from France itself, from the US. And to do that, they have to compare the cost across all those production locations. So they have the cost is formed by the cost they have, the little c, that has all the production function structure down there, buried there. So what is the cost for an American firm to produce in Korea in the car industry, right? Then there is a cost and efficiency loss of doing all this transfer of goods and ideas across countries. And then there is the productivity term, CL. So when you C is a stochastic, so the appropriate distribution is, it will be a multivariate Pareto. In other setups, it's a multivariate Frechet. Yeah?
Yeah, so how important is your modeling assumption for then relations with the KFP productivity?
Yeah, very. Okay. So I think that was also your question, Tobias, before. So yes, that's the strong assumption. There is this orthogonality between productivity and the intensity. So what you are not going to get here is that more productive firms are cleaner, or they choose less intensive energy, fossil fuels technologies. So that's what we lose. If we have that, if we have C depending on the intensity, the intensity depending on productivity, we cannot aggregate anything. So we thought a lot about this because that's at the core, is the strongest assumption we made. So what is it? Then we look at average. So what is the average where we allow heterogeneity? So we allow heterogeneity at the industry, country of origin, country of destination, fossil fuel type. So that's the level we can see in the data. For a second, let me say it like that. And the heterogeneity that we observe, that picture that I show you with the bars, between Norway and India, the difference in emissions intensity is of the same magnitude of the difference between within an industry across farms. So we say, okay, so it's as relevant, at least across countries, right, within an industry, that in a country within an industry and across farms. So that's, but it might be an important channel. So we leave it for future people to take on that one, because then you have to go to the computer right away. Chad?
Could you say something about why you chose the multivariate Pareto? I thought with this min that you were going to be multivariate crochet.
Yeah, it's analogous. So basically, it's equivalent to having like a Melitz type productivity that is Pareto, and then you make farms choose a Frechet draw across countries. So if you compound those, it's isomorphic. We have that proof in the previous paper to this multivariate Pareto. So the lesson is like, if you have like a Ricardian model, use multivariate Frechet directly. If you want these correlations in a Melitz type model, use multivariate Pareto, because then you need to do something like in the second. You need the selection rule. And that the multivariate Pareto integrates really well. So basically, imagine you have some fixed cost. We call it marketing cost to, say, selling in France from Korea, right? These are like truncated integrals that you'll have. So those are easy to solve with the multivariate Pareto, as it was easy to solve with the Pareto in the case of the Melitz model. So we have all the proofs in the multinational paper. But yes, I mean,
min across a bunch of Paretos is not Pareto, right? So
no.
But it's easy to solve.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, I have time. Yeah. To make it short, we invented this this distribution by backward engineer. It was like 12 years ago. We were at Penn State with Andres, and we said, okay, we need something that creates correlation, and it solves the integral problem of Melitz type models. And we start trying in MATLAB, going back and forth till we find this formula. I mean, we knew all about the Frechet, so we were close. And there is a companion paper that shows the property. There is a proper CDF, PDF, and all the moments. Yeah. Yeah, so this kind of, this type of apparatus, but the message that I want to convey is that you could have done this without multinationals and still have all the energy layers there and have the quantitative model with those. So this is the technology choice for non-mining firms. So they're going to choose from a set that looks also CS. And they're going to choose the intensity of the energy and non-energy inputs. And to mimic the production functions, within the energy inputs, they're going to have also a choice, a CS choice. So you see that the parameters, the elasticities have the same names in the production function, but with these wiggles. And this is the restricted assumption to decouple the productivity from the intensities, is that a farm will choose the A's before knowing the C's. If you can condition on the C's, well, is where aggregation goes out the window. So in that sense, A is going to be common across all farms from a country in a sector for that particular fuel or labor, etc. So they maximize expected profit. So let me show you very briefly the first order condition, because here is where, again, you can use these for multinationals or not. So very simple. The first order condition tells you that the slope of the technology frontier has to be equal to the slope of the isoprofit curve. And here are the parameters they choose. And these alphas, these are the revenue shares of energy inputs. So it's how much is these farms from Italy, in Vietnam, in the steel industry, spend on coal, say. So these are key objects, right? And we don't have them in the data, so I'll tell you in a second. So these alphas are going to, they have a form that is a CS form. So it has the prices, it has these shifters, everything is there. And multinationals, what they do is that I add this summation to the problem. So if you couldn't produce abroad, this will just be one term, domestic. And you can see the problem go through. In fact, we are solving the problem if we have a myopic firm that doesn't realize that they can do activity abroad and see how close it is. Or if it can modify what they choose, because now they have the prospect, I mean, I don't know if they're going to use it, of producing everywhere. And some places can be dirtier, with prices of, say, of coal that are very low, and then they make choices of alphas, even in their country, that are different, okay? And the A's. So having these multinationals affect the way they choose the technology beforehand. So just let me give you one analytical result, and then I move on to the estimates. So imagine I close almost everything in the model, all when we can solve it. So I close these input-output loops. I assume the technologies are exogenous, no trading energy, and flat fossil fuel supply curves. So what happened in that case is like we like this in trade, to have things that you can read directly from the data. So if I go to a war from the actual equilibrium to a war without multinationals, what this expression tells me is that change, in principle, you can read it from the data. You have to give me the emissions of, say, the Vietnamese firms in Vietnam in the steel industry per capita, employment in that sector and country, over total emissions in Vietnam in the steel industry. So it will depend, right, if the Vietnamese local farms are dirtier or cleaner than the average. So in principle, if you had this data, you could read it from the data. If you assume all these restrictive things that are very restrictive, okay? Let me give you one example. Imagine now everybody chooses the same intensity, say. So if you close MP, nothing happened in this war with flat fossil fuels curve, no this input-output amplification mechanism, not trading energy. Now imagine when that multinational activity only happened from clean to dirty countries. So if you close this, if you close MP, for sure emissions will increase in that sector. Okay, of course there is composition effect, so overall we don't know what will happen. Again, an ambiguity, that's why we need the quantitative theory. But in principle, they say the local farms are dirtier, that's what happened here. So if we turn off MP, it will increase emissions.
Because it's always replaced by the same amount.
Yes,
so
and prices are not changing of the fossil fuels. So that's a big assumption. The input-output loop is important because it amplifies. And of course, here we assume exogenous technologies. So that said, I'll say it here because maybe I don't have time. I'm going to show you a counterfactual where we close this technology channel, but we allow for everything else, and still will have some effect. Okay, so it's like a lower bound. So here I'm not showing you the equilibrium conditions because I want you to look at them very carefully. I want to just give you a snapshot of what we do for counterfactuals. So in trade, you use these methods that are called hat algebra. Okay, so what you do is you try to condition as much as you can on the data, right? Write the equilibrium system in hats, in changes from what we observe to whatever counterfactual situation you want to do. in our case, no multinational activity. And then that's how you run the contrafactual. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm showing you the system in levels. There is a version in hats, in changes. And what this tells us, those are all functions with elasticities, is that basically what we need to solve our quantitative model, you don't need all the parameters. The only things you need are elasticities and data. Data on this equilibrium, on these variables that I highlight here in red, because we don't observe them in the data. Okay, so what is that we don't observe? Well, we don't observe these lambdas IL and S. So we don't observe if the Italian firm in Vietnam in the steel industry ships stuff to Indonesia. And we don't observe the intensity to which these alphas, the energy revenue shares of these Italian firms in Vietnam and in the steel industry, how much they use, say, of coal or electricity. So what we are going to do, and this is where we use the model to complete the data. So if you have enough structure on the model, you can kind of, with the data you observe, use the equations and uncover these alphas and these lambdas. So what I can tell you is that the lambdas we know that are unique with some one identification assumptions. The alphas we know for some cases, but we are not totally sure. Yeah.
Just to check my understanding, what you're missing is the I.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. Yeah, yeah. So if I have, so what I have is the alphas without the I. That's going to be our data. Perfect. Yeah. So we have that, and then we have the lambdas with the I and the L, or the L and N, but no the three together. Okay. So what is that we are going to do? So what I said, to do hat algebra, you need parameters. And the parameters are going to be the production function of the non-mining sector. And these are the epsilons and gamma that I told you the literature assumed are 1. We estimate them with the census data for the US, variation within farm across states. The states differ a lot about regulations, so we could do that. IVs are used there, etc. Those are 0.45. The other parameters are directly from the word input-output table. For non-mining also, we use data from energy cost schedules from a Nature paper, and that's 0.25, that's the decrease in returns. And again, rest from the input-output. And here is preliminary, but this technology choice in the non-mining sector elasticities, we are using a simulated method of moments to match our stylized fact. This is work in progress. And Frechet parameters and other stuff are from literature, from our previous research. So, but I want to end up with this point and one figure. So, as I said, you need assumptions to uncover these variables at the eye level that you don't observe in the data. So we have a theorem in previous research that says if you give me an estimate of the raw, the correlation parameter, and you give me data on trade and multinational shares, and you made this a separability assumption on the frictions, the taus, then those data are uniquely determined. The alphas are yellow. I can uncover them. Same thing, similar with these alphas. So if we have these revenue shares at the eye level, I don't have them in the data. If you give me the elasticities of the production and technology choice functions, you give me MP data, and you give me energy shares at the country level, not the ownership country level. Again, if you have a technology choice in the model, a first order condition somewhere, you can uncover those alphas at the eye level. So the lesson here, if you wish, is that you can use the model sometimes when you don't have the data and impute it through the model conditions. You need to believe some of the identification assumptions. And mining sectors, boring is directly from the data. So what I'm going to show you in the last 2 minutes, right, is an accounting exercise and a counterfactual. So I'm going to assume no technology choice. We haven't implemented the whole machinery yet. And if I do that, I can just take from the data these energy shares. So, and everybody is the same. So it's going to be a lower bound if you want, because multinationals look like domestic firms. Okay? They have different productivity, but in terms of energy, they look like domestic firms. But still, there are all these other challenges. There are like upper slopey supply curve, input-output loops, tracing energy. So the calibration is simple in the sense that we impose from the data the energy shares we see for Vietnam in the steel industry, for coal, say. And here is the picture from the beginning. So I need to keep track of these emissions through the system. And we do that. And basically, the XC is the final consumption in France, right? We track back who produced it and who owns the farms. The chi is the Leontief inverse. But now it's an object that might have a lot of subscripts because we're keeping track who owns the stuff and where they're produced. And this first term, the is over P's, are these constants that transform production into emissions. So you observe it has a lot of subscripts. It depends how you sum. You get production-based emissions, the smoke you see on the factories, consumption that takes into account imports, and I'm going to focus on ownership, production, that is who owns, the General Motors. Okay, so these are some of the results. Again, lower bounds because we are assuming that everybody has the same technologies. So I put France there. They have more responsibility because the farms they own abroad, right, the orange line, than what they, for production, right? Then Russia is not a surprise. They have big responsibility because of the extraction of the fossil fuels. The US and China is an interesting one. China has more responsibility because of production than consumption, because they produce, but they send it to other countries. So you can start looking more carefully and see how these countries behave. And finally, I leave you with this one. So again, this is a lower bound. What will happen if multinationals had the same technology, made the same blueprint choices as the local farms? Well, emissions will increase a bit in the world. Not much. There's going to be a big difference across countries. We are still processing why this is happening. There is a lot of things happening in the background. Prices of fossil fuels are changing big time. Trade is there, but multinationals are not doing it anymore. So here we just close multinational activity, and you can see some countries, like European countries, will become dirtier, according to this. Some countries will become cleaner, like Ireland and Canada. So I leave you with that. We're still trying to understand more of the results, but this is the type of exercise and we are aiming to. So there are many issues that one can have addressed in an agenda with multinationals and environment. This is our first step. There are very interesting questions related to what happened with the optimal carbon tax if you now have multinationals. Okay, in a world where that, what those will tell you. What happens if there is leakage through multinationals? We don't have it here. That is a very interesting question. And then there is this new institutional, or if you have contracts between multinational and local suppliers that take into account what is called responsible sourcing, takes into account all these considerations of the environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for proposing to continue on lunch.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.